My name is Barton Morris. This is Travis Copenhaver. We are lawyers with the Cannabis Legal Group. This is Cannabis Live, our Facebook show that we do every week to talk about the issues that are affecting the cannabis industry in the state of Michigan and the things that we do on a day-to-day basis here in our office in the city of Royal Oak. This is December 6th, and it's our first show after the first day of recreational marijuana sales. So we thought we would start with a bit of news because it's super interesting. So Travis, let's hear what you got to say about it.
Yeah, so some of the first businesses licensed to perform adult use sales started on December 1st. That was this Sunday. There were only 6 businesses on the first day. 3 were in the city of Ann Arbor, and there were also some in Everett and Morenci. We don't have a lot of data from this yet. It was only a couple days ago. But the 3 facilities licensed in Ann Arbor are reporting approximately $221,000 of day one sales, which is pretty exciting news. I know I live
It
is. I live in the city of Ann Arbor. There were lines, they felt like they were almost like a quarter of a mile long from some of those facilities. So it's pretty exciting news. I think we're expecting to see some supply challenges for the first couple, weeks, potentially months of operation as more and more of these businesses have an opportunity to get online. Just given the dual approval process between getting a state license and a local license, there weren't a lot of businesses really open for day one. We talked previously about a set of procedures the MRA allows for equivalent licenses to exchange some of your medical marijuana stock into your adult use stock if you're some of these license types, and that was how some of these stores were able to get product for sale on the first. But I only anticipate we'll see more and more of these stores start opening up here. So
I think that says a lot, even though this is a very small sample size. But what it says is, to me, first of all, there's a significant demand for recreational marijuana. So it's something that we've known for a long time. It's something that a lot of people have predicted, but 200,000 for each store?
No, it was total. It was all 3 together. That would be crazy. Maybe if there wasn't some supply problems. Maybe if there's
so 221,000 for all 3 stores, which is still a significant amount of sales.
Right. We don't have data from the other 3.
I presume that was for one store.
Those are just the 3 stores in Ann Arbor out of the 6 total. Yep.
And it probably not everybody from Ann Arbor. That probably a lot of people came just because of the fact this is day one or the first weekend, and it was something that people wanted to take part in, and I can certainly understand that. Yeah, it's still really impressive, I think.
Certainly. Or it says something about the city, one of the 2. So, I think there was a lot of excitement, and I know just from following some social media and stuff that a lot of people came in for it. There's certainly going to be some initial, buzz here. And I know I was excited to participate in the first legal sales just because I could. So I'm sure there are a lot of people kind of feeling that way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's actually really cool. It's definitely one of the most exciting things that we do, or that I'm doing right now, is helping people get licensed for recreational retail and cultivation and stuff. So especially retail, obviously, because that's what everybody's looking forward to. All right, so we're going to talk about one of the questions that I think that we get most often in this office is, how much does a facility license cost? How much does it take to get a marijuana facility license? Or how much does it take to open up a marijuana dispensary or cultivation facility? And I want to start by saying that the answers to those questions are significantly intricate. They're very detailed. They're very they're all over the place, meaning that there's all types of different costs that are involved that could vary significantly. But at the same time, I think that we can provide a pretty good comprehensive overview of the typical costs that we see in order to provide just some informative information to let people know what they need to be thinking about in order to really put together an understanding of what the costs are. Because quite frankly, this is one of the things that people have a problem with. They don't fully understand is the cost necessary or the capital necessary to be able to move forward and be able to take care of everything that's necessary to open up and just get licensed, and I think that that's a good topic for us to talk about.
Right, and I think an easier question for us to ask is less like what's the total dollar amount, and more what are the big items that you need to anticipate to get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
So.
Well, We can always start with the easy stuff and then the most definite stuff, which is like filing fees for the state and city, right?
Yep. So there are 3 fees every cannabis license is going to have to pay from point A to point B. Those are the same 3 items we've talked about several times. There's an initial application fee when you submit what we call pre-qualification. So the fee associated with submitting your background check application. In both the medical and adult use system, that is $6,000 when you submit that application. So that is a process every cannabis business needs to go through regardless of license type. The next fee that's pretty universal across the board is the fee you pay to your municipality. This is per license. So when you go at the local level and seek the approval from your city or township for your license type, they can charge up to $5,000 per license. So if you're doing 1 license in a community, it's $5,000 potentially. Or if you do 3, it could be $15,000, 5 for each. The only thing about that particular fee is municipalities can choose to make it less than $5,000. $5,000 is their cap.
How often have you seen less than
Very
5,000?
few times.
Yeah.
But if you're going for like a Class A medical license or potentially one of these micro-sized licenses in the adult use system, I think that we will probably see some instances of municipalities recognizing those are smaller licenses and having their fee reflect that. But if you're budgeting it out, always plan on it being 5, it usually is.
Right.
If you're lucky, some communities will give you a refund if you're not selected and things like that, but it's pretty much always 5. The next fee is very, very much what I like to call the success fee. It's the regulatory assessment fee is what we call it on the medical side. I believe the technical term is initial fee on the adult use side, but that fee is very much based on the license type you're interested in. In medical, they range from $0 if you're a safety compliance facility, but $10,000 to $56,000 on the adult use side. I think the highest fee is $40,000. So it ranges from $4,000 to $40,000 on the adult use side.
And those are a lot more definite. And again, I like to, when people ask me about the fees and costs, these are costs that can be paid over time. Like that license fee or the success fee is not paid until the very end, until you're really ready to open.
It is literally the last thing you do.
Right. So it's not a fee that needs to be had at this point, right? It's not something that has to be within somebody's bank account immediately.
And you can think of these fees as steps along the way. So if you are taking a risk on your business and you need to pass a background check and you need the city's approval, if you don't get one of those 2 things to hit, you're never going to owe the last 3rd fee, which is the success fee. Right. So some of these applications, as we've talked about before, are competitive. Sometimes cities will select a winner. So if you're in the race to maybe get a license, maybe not, you don't have to budget that fee unless you win, which would imply if you don't win, then you're not paying that fee. So
we can talk about property acquisition very briefly, though, because obviously every single property is going to be different depending upon what type of facility that you're trying to get, the city in which that it's located, the competitive environment in which that it's located, the type of property, meaning like what the condition or class it's in. Really, we're talking about anywhere between $50,000 and $5 million. So,
or you're interested in that property. Are you buying it? Are you leasing it? Right. Is it a land contract? Is it a lease to own? Right. That's probably the biggest swing factor, I would say. There are leases out there that are super cheap for cannabis facilities right now, or you could be spending millions of dollars on a great location and anywhere in between.
So we're not going to obviously talk much about that, but we can, I think, talk more specifically about the professional fees, because I think that a lot of people don't understand all of the different professionals that are necessary, including lawyers. So we'll start with the typical legal services that we provide and some of the typical fees that we provide, just like in general. Because this is I don't want to make this into something that like all of our fees that we do, but just in general, I could say that first, irrespective of the lobbying services that we do, trying to get a city to opt in, stuff like that. I think more importantly, people have to understand that they are going to necessitate a corporation that they're going to have to file for, but more particularly the governing documents that govern that corporation. In particular, I'm talking about an operating agreement, which is necessary for an LLC, or perhaps a shareholder agreement that's necessary for a corporation. these things are necessary. These documents are necessary. A lot of people like to overlook them. What I mean by the operating agreement is the agreement that illustrates the relationship between the entity partners and that dictates how much each of these partners or shareholders, what type of interest they're going to have in their corporation, the manner in which that they're going to exercise it, voting rights, managerial rights, liquidation rights, distribution rights, basically everything that a partnership seeks to agree about, but also a bunch of things that they're not even thinking about as far as like what happens with respect to whether there's got to be a liquidation or if there's going to be buyout rights or
you
stuff
really,
like that.
we like to, not really even jokingly, refer to this document as basically your corporate prenup. Like, unlike when you marry a spouse, like you are forming a business relationship with partners, and that is the agreement that helps you know what your rights are if something goes a different direction. It's very easy to start a company with your business partners, perhaps they're friends or colleagues of yours, and everyone's excited and motivated and optimistic, and maybe 30 days later, maybe 30 years later, that might not be the situation. And you're really predefining what everyone's rights are and anticipating different directions things can go. So we all hope for success, but we really need to plan for the worst sometimes, and that's what that document's truly doing to protect you.
These agreements can be very simple, or they can be very complicated. They could be a $2,000 or $3,000 document, or it could be up to $10,000. And I've seen ones that are even much more complicated. So even though that's not necessarily a huge range, as though I'm going to give you some huge ranges when it comes to applications, but for an operating agreement or shareholder agreement, between $5,000 and $10,000, at least somebody should budget for, I think, under the circumstances, or most circumstances.
The complexity of your cap table and your set of partners is really going to drive that cost too. If you're a smaller group of people, it doesn't need to be even that expensive sometimes. But like almost all of these fees, the reason it's difficult for someone like Barton or I to tell you what the cost is going to be is complexity, and your unique set of circumstances is really going to drive the cost on almost every one of these factors. Yep. You could very easily have an operating agreement that might cost you a couple $100. That just is likely not what you should be anticipating when you're starting out and you don't really know those factors are going to be going in day one. It's always better to over budget, because it could be that range than under budget and be sad when it costs way more than you expected.
The same can be said for applications. So in order to have a facility, you're going to have a municipal application and a state application. And the state application is much more certain. We know exactly what that looks like, but every municipality is going to be different. Every municipality is going to, and with respect to which type of facility that you're going to be applying for. So I think in general, just the application costs for us were perhaps maybe about between $20,000 and up to $50,000 or even more, $50,000 even more, depending upon really the complexity of the municipal application and the degree to which that it's merit-based competitive application. Competition
itself doesn't drive this cost, but competition typically requires more of a touch on a project like that. Also very closely related is your timeline. If we, as your attorney project managing that application, have a week to get everything done, we're going to have to prioritize that project. Whereas if we have a month to get everything done, giving us the flexibility to get the items done as it naturally would fit into our workload is going to just translate into a lower fee. Sometimes though, when you're in a competitive situation, as we've seen a lot of these municipalities go, every point matters, every advantage matters, and if you're investing your time and money and efforts into your business, there are a lot of places that you can seek a competitive advantage outside of the actual application materials and legal items you're doing, but that is a significant portion of that competitive element. Just as important as finding the competitive location or reaching out to community stakeholders to get their support for your application. Those are equally important to the amount of effort you're putting into your actual application narratives as well.
In regard to completing the application, it's always going to be necessary, or I should say almost always going to be necessary, to have the services of other professionals. In particular, I think in every case I've seen, it's going to necessitate the employment of an architect and a civil engineer. the architect doing the floor plan, elevations, basically the pictures that they can show what the facility is going to look like. Even if it's existing, there's still the city still wants to see it on paper, and so those architectural plans, just the preliminary architectural plans, and then the civil engineering, they're the ones that do the site planning, that basically show the property and how many parking spaces there are and its proximity towards with the street and the size of the building, and basically all the civil engineering things that need to be included within a lot of even just general site planning.
Yep, and when that item hits can really drive cost as well. Some municipalities will make your floor plan, site plan, part of the calculus for selection, and when that's the case, the more professional and more well developed those items are, or you might need them really quick, sometimes those factors drive cost. When you're at the state side, where there isn't a deadline, where there isn't a competitive element for your facility application, you do need a floor plan. You do need signed and sealed blueprints for your facility, especially when you're a grower, a processor, or a lab for BFS review and things. So, there are some municipalities that not every municipality technically requires a floor plan. Most do. There might be some that'll get by with just a diagram because they understand the state will eventually evaluate your floor plan. But I would say in almost every competitive situation, in almost every large municipality, you're going to usually need a signed and sealed floor plan, and very often sometimes a site plan as well.
It's also very common to necessitate the use of a landscape engineer, that somebody's going to be responsible for the landscaping. That's generally going to be, and I say generally because sometimes that's already in place when you're purchasing a building or you're changing its use to a facility. But it's very common in order to use a landscape engineer, also an environmental engineer that can incorporate environmental necessities that need to be addressed that are specific to marijuana facilities, but also address situations that municipalities are looking for, because a lot of times municipalities, they're requiring that applicants take into account and do what they can in order to improve the environmental circumstances of a particular property. Redevelopment is something that a lot of municipalities are very much interested in and demanding, and so that redevelopment generally will include something with respect to the environment, creating like some green stormwater or storm drainage system, or using good structural green structural materials. Things of that nature. Right.
This can hit in different ways as well. When you're usually seeking a retail license type, like a dispensary, your provisioning centers, your retailers, a lot of times this cost will come in when you're looking at this from a cost perspective, because it becomes competitive. The more you can do and show that your project is better for that community will typically translate into more points. When you shift to some of those other license types and you look to like a grower or a processor, now the environmental question is a couple different factors. A lot of times those build outs are a little bit more structural in nature to the facility, and when you're taking getting a new use approved, a lot of times you need to get into that building and do a bit more heavy construction than you would for just designing a retail store. So you'll still have a similar cost, but instead of it being driven from like competition where you would typically see that on the retail side, sometimes it's just practical cost when you're designing a grow. These grows and processors are very, they don't want contaminants, testing requirements are high. So you might just as a business have environmental concerns, if there's some sort of, environmental issue with the property you've got. A lot of times these are converted industrial buildings and things. Or, in order to actually get the permits you need to do your construction, sometimes that requires you to do some blight remedying and things like that. And if you're unlucky, maybe you have that on both sides of the equation: competition up front, and then build out on the back end. So
architects also will be responsible for doing more work when it comes to like after the application process, after even perhaps the license is granted. Then you're going to have to actually perform the construction or redevelopment, and the architect's going to be necessary in order to create the construction documents. And the more construction or redevelopment there is, the more technical or the more work that's going to be necessary for the architect. And so a good architect is definitely almost as good as a good lawyer in this industry.
I tell a lot of people, a lot of you will start with me, but at the end of the day, you might be paying more with your other professionals than your attorney. We just get a lot of the upfront, and we end up being a lot of the kind of project management throughout. But you're probably going to spend the most amount of money on your professional when you're talking to your general contractor, especially if you're a manufacturing side license type. You're going to have to build out a facility, and that's usually going to be the most expensive part of the process, regardless of the newsworthy high licensing fees and things. Typically, your build out is going to be your most expensive line item, especially if you're a grower, processor, sometimes safety compliance facility.
Speaking of a build out for a grower or processor, there's always going to be a necessity to redevelop and re-engineer a particular facility, especially an indoor facility. It's going to be necessary to ensure the city is going to require that proper engineering from a structural engineer and from a mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineer for them to come in and provide the plans necessary to effectuate the grow facility that somebody may be thinking. Obviously, there's significant demands, plumbing for mechanical, structural, and electrical. Yep. And a lot of these buildings that somebody may be interested in growing in are not going to have those specifications. And so these engineers are necessary as well. The structural engineer in particular, especially when they're talking about putting heavy HVAC perhaps on the roof and all of the electrical upgrades that are necessary really does require these engineers, and those guys cost money too. Especially
if you were awarded the license from the municipality based on statements you've made about like odor mitigation, right?
Right.
If you've made a commitment to odor mitigation and the municipality gave you a license and you get to your build out phase, well, your HVAC is probably going to be a very important investment because you've made commitments to odor. It's one of 1,000 line items to be thinking about, but I tell a lot of people this as well. Just because the property is affordable and in the right spot, before you just go out, buy it, and get a license from municipality to throw a business in there, you should really be thinking about all the other costs that are involved in the build out. You might see two properties and one's cost you double, but it might actually be cheaper in the long run if it doesn't take as much love to kind of get it to licensure. So
we're potentially talking about like $100,000 in professional fees just for engineers and architects.
Yep, and let's not forget accountants. If you are if you're a medical licensee, you at minimum need a CPA attestation letter. Now you don't need that for the adult use side, but I would always highly, highly, highly recommend when you're starting a new business and you're making expectations for what these investments are going to be, you should be probably reviewing that with an accountant. And just like I'm not an architect, I'm not an accountant. So, I always recommend my clients are discussing these financial decisions they choose to make with their professionals.
An accountant is necessary, so is a bookkeeper, especially for a retail establishment. Many people already know what 280E is. It's an IRS code provision that precludes anybody trafficking in controlled substances from deducting normal business expenses, which means that there has to be some decisions made as to what is a deductible business expense and attributable to cost of goods sold and what isn't. And there's a lot of people trying to make some allocations that are perhaps questionable or liberal, and so it's necessary to have that bookkeeper that knows what they're doing when it comes to doing this type of accounting in order to ensure that they are going to have appropriate books when it comes to audit time, because there will be an audit time 3 to 5 years from now. That's when the IRS is going to begin auditing, when there's been enough time for people to shoot themselves in the foot or provide the necessary bookkeeping to demonstrate that they know what they're doing. So that's something that's a cost that needs to be evaluated immediately from the very beginning.
The current adage in the cannabis industry right now, and you should be aware of it, is it's not will I be audited, it's when will I be audited. And it's, usually it's a concern that's very easy to kind of kick down the line because it's not something that happens immediately. But if you let yourself operate, as you mentioned, for a couple of years, and now you're going to have to go explain why you made all those decisions after the fact, you could significantly run into some issues, and a lot of companies do.
Security, of course, is another issue. It's obviously a very important issue, and it's something that cannot be overlooked. Not only is it necessary in all cases to have a security plan, a written plan that's going to illustrate the the security requirements is something necessary for the state application. It is also generally necessary for a municipal application. And so that written plan is going to be necessary, oftentimes written by a security professional. But then there's the actual equipment for the security. So that is often the same contractor that's going to provide the written plan. Sometimes it's different. The purchase and installation of the equipment, the cameras, the keypads, the doors, the locks, the security that is inherent in these facilities is significant. It has to be taken into account, and we're talking about a couple $100,000. I mean, like
it can be
for I say that I see a 20,000 square foot building that I was just looking at, and the security equipment for that was all brand new. Was $200,000.
I mean, scope of your project is clearly a factor here, but it is a factor for every license type of any kind. If you're a license holding cannabis business, you are required to have cannabis under camera at all times. You're required to have cameras on every entrance you have. You're required to have locks and alarms. So even if you're a 100 plant count grow or a 2,000 plant count grow, I mean, your scope will determine overall cost, but your security is a state requirement, and it's almost always a local consideration.
Yep.
So.
You want to go over a list of like other costs that perhaps a retail establishment may...
other things that come up. I mean, because it's not just minimum requirements. It's also you are starting a business, and that business is going to be competing with other businesses. It's going to be engaging with the industry. So if you're a retailer, you need to consider things like your branding, your advertising, your marketing. You need to consider, when I am a consumer of yours and I walk into your retail establishment, what's making me choose to buy my products here as opposed to your competitor across the street. So it's not just how do I get this license, but what am I going to do with it, and making sure that my business is in a position to be successful. If you're not a retailer, if you're another license type, you're going to still have marketing, and you're still going to be developing a brand. And I like to think of it in that context, but how does your facility look? Does it have a clean build out? Do you have like this appearance you're trying to maintain to further your other goals, maybe goals of cleanliness, maybe goals of developing B2B relationships and things like that. In addition to that, you're going to be developing work. If you're a secure transporter, you need consumers that are growers, processors, and provisioning centers. If you're a grower, you might be in the supply and demand kind of key position right now, but you still need to find people willing to purchase your products. So in addition to just building out your facility, there's certain things you're required to do, but what are your goals with this facility? If I'm a retailer, what are my store shelves going to look like? But then it comes down to just basic operational things as well. My point of sale system and computers, cleaning supplies, packaging supplies, my equipment I use to deal with waste. And then, we didn't even talk about things like payroll and items like that.
Yeah.
So.
Think about payroll and employees. One other thing that just popped up is it's almost going to be universally necessary, at least it should be, in order to plan for and perform a training of your employees. There's a company in particular that I'm familiar with, cannabistrainers.com. Maureen's the owner there. She's got a great company, and it's because almost every single facility is going to need some type of employee training, particularly retail, but all of these facilities really need some employee training. It's not something that should be overlooked. I think it's something that should be built into a budget to ensure that the employees are being trained properly. This is a very important position that they're put in, especially if they're the face of the company. They're interacting with the patients or the clients or the customers, the consumers. And it's necessary that they are trained properly. This is not like selling, at 7-Eleven. This is selling marijuana, recreational or medical. That includes, medical training as well, as far as like the medical properties of particular medicines that may be for sale, that they can provide some patient education. So I think employee training is important.
Right.
And should be taken into consideration.
Another factor I think is very, very important to consider is just general risk. You are entering into a highly volatile, evolving industry. So, it all looks great, and it, quite frankly, does seem great, but you're entering into cannabis. Cannabis still has several legal challenges. Cannabis still has new rules that are coming out every day. So if you approach this industry with a certain set of assumptions, it's responsible for you to build in some flexibility. Today we can assume our costs are going to be X dollars, but when you actually get to the reality of the situation, those assumptions don't always hold up. They could, you could have significantly under or overestimated something, and it's just important to build in flexibility to your projections.
Speaking of risk, we have to talk about it. We have to mention insurance too.
Yep, very much.
That is definitely the premiums have to be taken into consideration.
License requirements, so you need it.
Right.
Can't even skip it.
Yeah. We're not. We're lawyers. We are not experts on this issue, right? Like I'm very comfortable in saying that this is not an expertise. Like I've built a bunch of business plans, but it is not something that we do. We provide legal advice. At the same time, these are things that we have run into. I have run into over and over and over again. I've seen these costs. I've seen my clients engaged in all of these different things repeatedly. And so that's why I thought it'd be a good idea for us to talk about it. Because I get the question all the time, as much as I get legal questions, we get questions about how much is this going to cost too. So I try to be as helpful as I can and provide all of the different things that need to be thought about, the different items that need to be thought about, and that's what we chose to do today. But that being said, we're not the experts. Don't rely upon 100% what we say. You got to go out and do your own due diligence. But hopefully you can take the considerations that we've brought before you today for you to give you an understanding of the general considerations that need to be made.
The real reason Barton and I can't tell you what the cost is going to be is because it's 100% dependent on the choices you make for this business. And sometimes it's very much dependent on how lucky you are and what the opportunities you're able to capitalize on. If you find a great deal on real estate, you could save almost hundreds of thousands of dollars. But you can't assume that will happen, right? And another big cost factor that I think should be emphasized is time, and then when do you get profitable? I know we're wrapping up here, but I think this is going to wrap up on while this industry has great projections, if you were open today, you're not going to be expecting to make tons and tons of money immediately. I know we started the show with some huge numbers from the 3 sales, but that's a bit of an excitement kind of day one kind of boom thing. I think if you look and ask the average operating licensee right now, when did you start making money? If you're a grower and you get your license, you're starting to grow cannabis. It's probably going to take some time for you to actually grow into that license, feel comfortable with it before you actually start getting into profit. Same with if you're a new retailer, you'll get probably some buzz and things, but you need to start to kind of feel out your space and it's continuing to evolve here with how do you be successful staying in the lane of what your license allows you to do. And it's really, really important to make sure that you project enough time for you to get there. If you blow your entire budget, the last dollar you spend is paying your regulatory assessment fee and they put that license in your hand, are you going to be able to survive the next 3 to 4 months before you're actually getting more money coming back in?
A lot of times we like to say that it's just like any other business, but actually it's not.
It's probably harder, way harder.
It is because there's changes that can happen that you're going to expect. I think a good example is with all of a sudden the CDC says, vitamin E acetate is something that is killing people in vape cartridges. And then, of course, there's a reaction to the marijuana regulatory agency that says, we're going to start testing for that. And all the vape cartridges that are for sale now, you got to take them off the shelves and it's all going to be retested. I think a lot of people lost a lot of money.
Oh, certainly. There's going to be businesses that just don't survive that change.
Right.
Similar to that,
and that's completely unexpected. Not
right.
I mean, and it's just people didn't expect to do that.
I'm sure it didn't, but it did feel like it kind of came out of left field, just immediately a hit right before Thanksgiving.
But that's the industry is.
That's just how it is.
This is going to happen, and there's going to be things that happen like that in the future until there's a maturity in the industry to the degree to which that there's a lot more certainty. So for the next decade or so, there's going to be uncertainty.
The other thing that makes this really difficult is the assumptions and the reality that businesses today are building their model off of are potentially not going to be there by the time a new applicant gets to market. Today, growers and processors are able to bring in caregiver product based on an emergency situation. The Marijuana Regulatory Agency has the ability to end that. So, if you're
anytime,
if you're a processor or a grower and your revenue is being driven by the intake of caregiver product, what happens when that's not there anymore, right? I mean, if you had got to participate in that for a few months, sure, you might have a bit of a buffer, but like if you're expecting that to be your business model when you get to market and you're getting to market in a month, and then 29 days before later, that's no longer a factor. Now what are you going to do? So trying to rely on what the current existing businesses are doing when you're maybe a year away from that can be difficult too, because they're working on assumptions that could just be gone by the time you get to market. So.
All right, so I guess we'll wrap up with that. It's definitely been an interesting conversation.
Definitely.
And I'm glad that we did this show, and we look forward to doing other shows, of course. As many questions, as many issues that you guys bring to us, we will attempt to bring before you on our show and continue to do good work for the marijuana industry. So that being said, this is Travis. My name is Barton. We're the Cannabis Legal Group, and we'll look for you next time.
Thanks, guys.